For 5,000 years, the Sumerians have been called the people who invented everything. Writing, cities, law, the first courts. History hands them a neat beginning. Local farmers who settled the mudflats of southern Iraq and slowly built the first civilization out of nothing. That was the story for over 100 years. Then gene scientists finally pulled DNA from bones buried beneath ancient Mesopotamia, and the results did not match the textbook. The language had no relatives. The genes told a stranger story. And the people we say started human history may not have come from where anyone thought. Go back about 6,000 years. A flat brown plain at the bottom of what is now Iraq, where the Tigris and the Euphrates spread out before they reached the sea. No mountains, almost no stone, no timber. Just reed, mud, and floodwater. On paper, one of the worst places on Earth to start a civilization, and it is exactly where the first one appears. The textbook version is simple, and it has been repeated for generations. People drifted into the marshes over thousands of years, learned to drain and water the land, and slowly grew their villages into the first true cities: Eridu, Uruk, Ur. Local people, local roots, a straight line from mud hut to temple tower. Nothing arrives from outside, nothing needs explaining. It is a clean story. The problem is that almost nothing about the Sumerians is actually clean. Start with the thing they are most famous for: their writing. We can read it. We have hundreds of thousands of their clay tablets, more words from Sumer than from most ancient peoples combined. We know their grammar, their gods, their lawsuits, even their love poems. And in all of that, there is one thing the language plainly refuses to tell us: where it came from. Sumerian is what language experts call an orphan. It has no known parent and no known relatives. It is not Semitic, like the Akkadian and Babylonian tongues that came after it. It is not Indo-European. It does not fit into any family tree we have. Every other major language of the ancient Near East can be tied to a wider group, a set of cousins spread across a region. Sumerian sits completely alone, a single tree with no forest around it. That matters more than it sounds. A language does not appear from nowhere. It grows over a very long time, inside a community, usually right alongside neighbors who speak something related. So when a language turns up with no living relatives and no lost ones either, anywhere on Earth, it is telling you that its speakers came from a place or a people that has otherwise vanished from the record. The people who taught the rest of us how to keep records left no clear record of themselves. They did leave one description of themselves. In their own tablets, the Sumerians call themselves the black-headed people, the Sag-Gigga, and they called their land Ki-en-Gi. Experts still argue about what the black-headed people was meant to mark. Many read it as black-haired, a way of setting themselves apart from lighter-haired neighbors. Others think it points to something older, a memory carried from wherever they had been before. Either way, the label does the same quiet thing the language does. It draws a hard line between the Sumerians and everyone around them. They did not see themselves as just another local tribe. They saw themselves as a people of their own, set apart, with a beginning worth naming. So experts went looking for that beginning, and this is where an entire field lost its footing. The search even has a name. They call it the Sumerian problem, and it has been splitting experts for more than 100 years. This was never one neat argument. It split into a dozen. Did the Sumerians come down out of the eastern mountains, the high country of what is now Iran? Several clues point that way. Their great temples, the ziggurats, are man-made mountains. Step towers raised on a plain that has no hills at all, as if they were rebuilding a place they remembered from somewhere else. In their writing, the sign for mountain and the sign for foreign land run together. You do not build mountains from memory if you grew up in a swamp. Others argued the opposite direction, that the Sumerians came by water, sailing up the Gulf and settling the coast first. Their oldest and holiest city, Eridu, sat closest to the ancient shoreline, and their lost paradise, a place they called Dilmun, sits out across the sea. A few looked further still, toward the Indus Valley, toward Central Asia, toward anywhere that might explain a people who simply did not fit the land around them. 100 years of work, and the experts could not even agree on a continent, so not exactly settled. For a long time, the belief was that texts and pottery would solve this in the end. Dig long enough, translate enough tablets, and the homeland would turn up. People thought they had the full picture coming. They did not. Because underneath the city the Sumerians built, archaeologists kept finding an older one. Before Sumer, there was the Ubaid, a culture that spread across the same marshes more than 1,000 years earlier, with its own pottery and its own little temples on the exact spots where the great Sumerian cities would later rise. The deepest levels of Eridu are Ubaid, and to this day, nobody can say for certain whether the Ubaid people were early Sumerians or a completely different people the Sumerians later moved in on top of. The smooth, unbroken line the textbook promised breaks right at the bottom of the dig. Something changed down there. We just cannot see who. One more clue comes from the Sumerians themselves. Their famous king list opens by saying that kingship came down from the heavens, then lists the first rulers ruling for impossibly long stretches, thousands of years each, before a great flood starts the count over. Experts read those numbers as myth, and as raw history they almost certainly are, but notice the shape of the claim. The first people to ever write history down chose as their opening line to say their order did not begin among them. It came from outside, from above, from before. That is not how a people describe a civilization they grew in their own backyard. It is how they describe something that arrived. The oldest Mesopotamian stories say the same thing. In the Eridu Genesis, in the Atrahasis epic, in the great creation poem the Enuma Elish, the pattern repeats. Beings they called the Anunnaki come down, and the building blocks of civilization are handed over rather than earned. Those are religious texts. But given the chance to explain where everything they knew had come from, the Sumerians did not point at the marsh under their feet. Every time, they pointed away. Pottery and tablets had carried the question about as far as they could. Then the gene scientists arrived, and right away they slammed into a wall almost no one outside the field talks about. You cannot easily pull ancient DNA out of Mesopotamia. DNA breaks down easily, and heat tears it apart. The very thing that makes southern Iraq so punishing, that long, harsh heat, is the same thing that erases the DNA record buried in its soil. In the cold caves of Europe, a bone 40,000 years old can still give up a full set of DNA. In the baked ground of Sumer, a body far younger than that can be wiped clean of any code we can read. For decades, that is why the question sat frozen. We had the cities, the writing, thousands of skeletons in museum drawers, and we could not read the one record that does not lie about where people come from. That looked like a tools problem, the kind better machines would someday fix. It was something else. It was hiding how messy the real answer was. The first true crack did not come from ancient bone at all. It came from the living. Out in the marshes of southern Iraq, there is a people called the Marsh Arabs, the Madan. For a long time, outsiders treated them as newcomers who wandered in with their water buffalo long after the ancient world was gone. But many experts thought the exact opposite, that the Marsh Arabs were the closest thing left on Earth to the original Sumerians, still living in the same reed world, still building the same arched reed houses you can see pressed into tablets 5,000 years old. In the year 2011, a team of scientists finally tested that idea head-on. They sampled the DNA of 143 Marsh Arabs and weighed it against the wider group of people in Iraq. On its surface, what they found looked like the answer the textbook had always wanted. The Marsh Arabs carried a deeply local mark, a Middle Eastern base rooted in that land for a very long time. These were not recent arrivals. The people there were old, truly anciently old. But folded inside that same result was the detail that quietly muddies everything. One specific male bloodline, a single branch of a Y chromosome line the scientists tracked, showed a sharp local spread that lined up in time with the rise of the very first Sumerian city-states. The DNA had recorded a sudden jump in people at the exact moment the cities exploded into being. A group growing fast, packing in, taking hold, right when writing and kingship appear in the ground above them. The data did not simply say old. It said something happened here. And alongside that local base ran fainter threads, weak traces reaching toward Southwest Asia and toward Africa, the kind of mix you do not expect from a sealed, purely local bloodline. A people said to be born from nothing but the mud, carrying threads from somewhere else. And no, that is not a stretch in the reading. It is in the published data. Up to this point, you could still wrestle the DNA story back into the old shape. Old people, local roots, case closed. That was about to flip. In the year 2022, a huge study landed. Scientists gathered ancient DNA from across the whole region the Sumerians grew out of, the great arc running from Anatolia down through Mesopotamia into the Levant. Hundreds of ancient people, the widest DNA window yet opened, onto who actually lived there and when. The picture that came back was not one rooted group sitting still for 10,000 years. It was movement. Layer upon layer of it. Years of smaller results had hinted at it, and then this larger one made it impossible to wave away. The early farmers of the region were never one single people. There were separate groups, Mesopotamian, Levantine, and others, mixing and pressing into one another across thousands of years. New DNA signals show up at the very moments new tools show up in the dirt above them. Pottery appears, and a new line of ancestors appears right with it. The Near East the Sumerians were born into was not a quiet, sealed homeland. It was a crossroads, churning, with people flowing through it in waves we are only now able to count. And that quietly takes the clean story apart. The textbook Sumerian, the local farmer who slowly grew a city with no outside help at all, barely exists in the DNA record. There is mixing. There is a rival. There is a group that jumps at the exact moment civilization switches on, speaking a language tied to no one. And that language is still sitting in the middle of all of it, refusing to name a single relative. In time, that silence may turn out to be the loudest clue of all. Here, honesty has to step in, because the headline always runs ahead of the proof. We do not yet have a clean, fully read set of DNA we can hold up and say, this person was Sumerian, and here is where their family came from. The heat stole most of that evidence before anyone could read it. What we have is the shape of the answer, traced from people alive today, from ancient DNA around the region, from a language with no family, and a people who built mountains on a plain and called themselves set apart. The bones have not given a full confession. They have given more than enough to say the simple story was always wrong. This is also the spot where a very different answer usually gets shouted from the back of the room. In the 1970s, a writer named Zechariah Sitchin took these same Sumerian puzzles, the sudden civilization, the strange beginning, the gods they called the Anunnaki, and built a big claim around them. In his telling, the Sumerians got their knowledge from beings who came from a hidden planet he called Nibiru. It is a thrilling story that has sold for half a century. It is also a fringe idea that mainstream experts reject completely. His readings of the tablets are doubted, his planet has never been found, and his leaps go far past what the tablets say. But strip Sitchin away, and the real puzzle does not shrink, it grows. The real mystery never needed visitors from space, a language with no relatives anywhere on Earth. A people who appear with full writing and full cities almost at once. A beginning 100 years of experts could not pin to a single continent. A homeland erased by heat before the DNA record could catch it. None of that comes from Sitchin. All of it comes straight out of the evidence, and all of it still has no answer. So where does that leave the people who started recorded history? Right where they have always been, and that is the part that gets to you. In full view, and still no one can place them. We can read their grain receipts and hymns, name their kings, walk the ruins of the first cities they raised out of the mud. And we still cannot tell you, with the sureness the textbook always pretended to have, who they were before they got there. That set of remains in the sealed lab tube, the few grams of ancient bone that pulled modern science back into this hunt, still has not given up a clean answer. The machines get sharper every year, the samples pulled from deeper graves and read more closely, and every time the picture gets clearer, the same shape swims back into focus. Not a quiet local people who slowly grew a civilization in their own backyard, but a people who arrived, swelled, and set themselves apart, carrying a language from a homeland that no longer exists, and bloodlines from more than one place. The textbook said the Sumerians were simply the people who had always been there. The DNA, as far as it can speak, says they were something stranger. And the one thing that could finally close the case, the full DNA of a person who walked the streets of Uruk 5,000 years ago, still sits somewhere in the baked ground of Iraq, waiting for someone to lift it out before the heat erases it for good.